But I think and my parents were always very independent. So even growing up, they never even hinted at the fact that eventually we would need to take care of them. I mean, they gave us a lot of freedom, which I'm very grateful for. And I think it was always in the back of my mind that eventually I would want to help them in their older age. But you don't plan for these things.
Yeah.
You know, you don't think about your parents ever getting old or becoming vulnerable or getting sick. I mean, nobody ever plans for that. Nobody ever plans for illness and aging.
Yeah.
So the other kind of strange thing about me is, I grew up speaking Taiwanese, so I don't speak Mandarin, even though my parents tried to put my brother and I through Chinese school. But I think it sort of started late, and we rebelled because I think we were like 9 and 10, and we were with these kindergartners, and we didn't want to be with these little kindergartners. So we refused to learn Chinese, but this is just goes to say that I don't know Chinese.
Yeah.
And I find it kind of, given all the different transitions, it's hard to and also I'm also, because I'm here because of my parents, but when my parents pass away, I think I want to go back to the States. So what is it worth the investment at this stage to learn Chinese?
Right.
So that kind of was a big question mark in my mind in terms of, now can I get a job without learning Chinese? So.
Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome to my show, Old Asian Lady. Today, my guest is Aileen Chang. She is born and raised in the U.S., and she moved back to Taiwan last year. Aileen, thanks a lot for coming in to talk with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So, I met you last year when you had just moved back. Why did you make the decision to move back to Taiwan?
Well, my parents came back to retire about maybe 10 years ago, and they eventually got older, and then my mom was in and out of the hospital, and then I think what really was the turning point was when my father got dementia, and he needed a lot of care. And then my mom also had been declining so much that it was clear that she wasn't able to make a lot of the decisions. And my relatives who had been helping with my parents were also getting older, and they had their own, things to take care of, plus health issues and all that. So it just became very clear that they needed more help, and it was good to be closer to them.
Okay. So, was it a long process that you decided to come to Taiwan? Because you're here to take care of them. But, I just was wondering, because I feel like in Asian cultures, that is a thing that people do. Your parents get older, and it's kind of an obligation sort of way that the children come and take care of them, however it is that they have to do it. So you were in the States, and you had to make a decision to come back. And what was the process like? After you heard that you needed to do something about your parents.
I think it was sort of a gradual process. My parents, I was born and raised in the U.S., and we didn't grow up surrounded by a lot of Taiwanese culture, even though we had a lot of relatives and extended family. But I think and my parents were always very independent. So even growing up, they never even hinted at the fact that eventually we would need to take care of them. I mean, they gave us a lot of freedom, which I'm very grateful for. And I think it was always in the back of my mind that eventually I would want to help them in their older age, but you don't plan for these things.
Yeah.
You know, you don't think about your parents ever getting old or becoming vulnerable or getting sick. I mean, nobody ever plans for that. Nobody ever plans for illness and aging.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you think about it every now and then. It's in the back of your mind, but ultimately, and you just hope. I mean, I'm a Christian, so I pray that God will show me in the right moment that when I'm needed to be around or to be closer to them. And there were many times when my parents had come back to retire. My brother and I started visiting, of course, more, and I would say the last 5 years when I visited, it was then that it became harder and harder to leave, because you saw them declining and becoming more vulnerable, and then it was so painful to leave them, that, and even then I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't know at what point is the right moment. And of course you and especially for me, you know, I have nothing here in Taiwan.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know anybody. I have a few extended family that I barely know. So for me, it was sort of like it better be very clear.
Yeah, the message needs to be really
the message has to be very clear and
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah.
So so I think what was very clear was when my father, I mean, my mother was, when she moved back, I think, I mean, they were both in good health, and then what happened was my mom, there was this one year that the dengue epidemic was pretty bad. They both lived in Tainan in the south, and she happened to get it, and she was in the hospital for a really long time. And thankfully she recovered, but it put her body in a very kind of messed up state. And then since then she had like a hypertensive crisis, and then she like fell and broke her arm. I mean, it's one thing after another.
Yeah.
But I think what happened a few years after the dengue, she had a hypertensive stroke. And then at that point, my dad, with the help of my aunt, they hired a foreign caregiver because she wasn't really able to get around much by herself. And my brother and I had visited that year, and we, you know, it's hard because you also when you're not with, you know, they're far away, you don't see them on a regular basis. So you see them in whatever, the 1 or 2 weeks that you're visiting. But that only tells you a piece of the story.
Yeah.
And then after that, we would be on video calls, but video calls don't really tell you that much of the reality. And of course, your parents never, you know, they try to put on a good face, and everything's fine. And they're used to being independent. So it took a while to really see clearly what was really needed. And of course, sort of peeling back the layers too of what is it that they're able to do and not able to do. And then it really wasn't until I moved here that I realized, oh my gosh, there was so much that my parents went through, especially my mom when she was sick. Like I just never imagined, you know, and they don't tell you the details. They just kind of overlook it. So, so that I learned a lot from that, I think. And
so, you know, you came back and you said that you have a brother. So was there a decision between the two of you that it was going to be you that moved back? Because you had a job as well, right? So, yeah, well, how did that come about?
I don't think we really discussed it. I think just growing up, I've always felt a little bit more responsible.
Okay. Is he younger than you?
He's older.
He's older than you.
I think just temperament-wise and his personality.
But generally, like, I feel like in Asian cultures, it's the older son that takes more of the. that takes more of the responsibility. But in the U.S. too, because like you said, you guys live in the States. Your brother was born in the U.S. as well.
Actually, he was born in Japan.
Oh, he was born in Japan. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That because of the cultural difference and there's adjustments made, so yeah, he wasn't suitable as the older brother to take the responsibility.
Yeah, I think also, well, okay, back up a few more years before my parents moved here. My parents actually moved to at that time. So my brother was living in the suburbs of Seattle, in near Kirkland. That's a Costco brand, right?
Yeah,
yeah. So near Kirkland, and my parents had decided we want to be closer to our children, and so they moved to, because they were in California, Southern California. I was on the East Coast, so they moved to Seattle, to another suburb, and to be closer to my brother and his family. Him being the oldest. But I think boys are boys. Like they're not like daughters, And so, of course, he was willing to do anything for my parents, but my parents had to ask him. He wasn't. He didn't know what to do unless they asked, or unless you tell him.
Right.
I think that's kind of, I shouldn't generalize, especially in this day and age. People will be like, what? You're being... but that's been my experience, is that a lot of times, the guys don't always know necessarily what to do. And then one day, I remember the phone call that I got from my parents, or from my mom. She's like, she just told my brother and I, oh, we're gonna move to Taiwan in like a month or two, and we were both like, what?
Wow.
How did that decision come to be? And but in hindsight, I think, and what prompted them was just the medical care. I mean, they were on Medicare.
Back in the States.
States, and it just, I think the medical system, there's just so much paperwork, and there's so much, you've got to have the Medicare plus the supplementary insurance, and there's just so much. And I think for immigrants, for my parents who they moved there in their mid-30s, it's, I don't know, but for them it was just
complicated.
It was complicated.
Yeah.
And of course I didn't tell my brother. My brother didn't know, and I didn't know.
Maybe they did hint something to your brother, but maybe he just didn't get it. Yeah. And then they just, I don't know.
Yeah. And my mom needed a lot of dental work, which wasn't covered by the insurance. And they still had Taiwan nationality. So I think originally they were just going to come to Taiwan and get the dental work.
Right.
I think my dad, I think he saw the writing on the wall, like, oh, this is not gonna be a simple thing. So somehow they just decided they were gonna stay. And healthcare is so much cheaper here. I mean, there's just no comparison.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I think if the trajectory of their health had come to a point where it is now, I think it would have been, I don't know how my brother and I would have been able to afford the health care
back in the States.
Because they're both in a very nice care home, and I think also the culture of caring for the elderly here is very different. So I do feel like it's a good place for them, even though it's unfortunate that it has to be so far. But for their sake, I think for them, it's nice for them to be in a place where they grew up. It's familiar, even though they'd been away for a long time. Yeah. But I think as you age, you kind of revert back to the things that are most familiar to you in your youth. And adjustment for them is less of an issue than it would be for someone who's never lived in Taiwan.
Yeah, exactly. Like you. So you made the decision that as the daughter, it's more, and I feel like that is also maybe
It could be
not
cultural.
always, but it's culturally significant that the daughter does it in Asia, maybe. But that's weird because usually the older son expected to take care. Because in my family, in terms of obligations for certain things, my brother, who's the older brother, was expected to take care of a lot of things.
Yes.
But
No, you're right.
Yeah. But because he also lived abroad, then it ended up to be my sisters that had to take care of the things, issues and things that happen, and mostly them taking care of it. So
yeah, I think like the older brother, the oldest will, I think culturally in Asian cultures, kind of are like the head of the household.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
kind of looked upon as that, which I think my brother is. I'm talking more about, having the eye to know, like to be able to sense, like, okay, my mom needs my parents need accompaniment, not just financial,
Right.
and not just the logistical things.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there is the kind of care that you give somebody who you can see is vulnerable now. And I think women just tend to be better at that.
Yes,
like
I agree with
recognizing
that.
those things and recognizing, oh, now that she's handicapped, there's a lot of things that she's not able to do for herself. A lot of her freedom is taken away, and who's gonna help her with that?
Yeah.
I think we have more empathy in some ways,
Yes.
and we can kind of,
In a lot of ways, I think women tend to generally have more empathy
Yeah.
than men do. But yeah, so then when you made the decision then that it was you that was going to come and do it, how long did it take? Like a month, 2 months for you to prepare and...
well, I didn't really have time.
things-
Yeah, I didn't
Oh,
have
you
time to
didn't
prepare because my dad was in the hospital.
Okay.
And so he was, and this is what I mean about, like, this would never happen in the U.S., I don't think. So my dad was, he was in the hospital, and he had, like, he had all sorts of, he had a urinary tract infection, he had pneumonia. It was then that they diagnosed him with dementia because he had not been eating.
Wow.
And was very frail, and so I think he was hospitalized, let's say in end of May, beginning of June, and I was actually out of town at that time. So then it took me a while. I was on a trip, and then I came back, and through just communication with my relatives and with my mom, it became clear, like, he couldn't go back home. So then it was, so I need to come to Taiwan and then assess the situation. And I had a feeling at that point that, because I had come to see my dad, because he had surgery, he had hernia repair, and he was already very frail then. So I just knew, like, it was just a matter of a short time where I knew I would have to make a decision, but I just didn't know when that time was. So when he was hospitalized this last time, so this was in 2022, he was in the hospital, and I was in communication with we had hired a caregiver in the hospital, and I was in communication through her and through my mom a little bit, and maybe the nurse, I don't remember if I spoke to the nurse, but somehow we were able to communicate to the doctor that, can he stay there until I come? Which it took a couple of months because I needed to get all this kind of my own situation settled so I could come for an extended period of time, potentially, if I needed to. And so, the hospital just was able to wait for me. It was almost like 8 weeks.
Oh, 8 weeks that he was
In the hospital. Yeah. I think he wasn't ready to be discharged until 4 to 6 weeks. He really was. They needed to. he needed to be there for that long. But then they kind of extended it
out a little bit, yeah.
waiting for me to come. And then when I came, I mean, I was just really impressed with the nurses, and the doctor was just so, yeah, like they were just so understanding and so nice about my dad being there. And then I felt like I could take as much time as I needed to find a care home. I mean, in the U.S., you'd be like, it's all about, you know, the bed and the money and
the efficiency,
the insurance will be on, the insurance company would be on your case to get you out of the hospital. And but I felt like I had that time to look for a good place, and I had some family help me, and that would never happen in the U.S.
Yeah. So how did you find the place? I mean, where is you found him a home?
Well, the hospital gave me like a list of 100 places, and I was like, where do I begin? But then I had a friend who kind of did some research, and she kind of found, you know, which ones were like the 5-star care homes and the ones that were, you know, close by. And then we called a few places and we visited a couple places. But then what really helped was the caregiver of my dad in the hospital. They are just caregivers.
Okay.
But they're in-house. They're in the hospital.
Okay.
They're not foreign caregivers. They're part of the hospital.
Right.
And so you can hire them to take care of the patient. And they take care of more than one. But so they see a lot of people coming in from the different care homes in that area, from the community. So they can tell which ones are well taken care of and who is not well taken care of. So she actually, this caregiver, gave me a name of a place that she, you know, had heard, because there's like a net. They hear through the grapevine which care homes have a bed, and then she told me, why don't you try this place, because the people who come from there are usually well cared for, and they're clean, and they're no bed sores, and I think they have extra beds there. Why don't you call? So we called, and sure enough, they had a bed, and we were able to visit that same day, and we went, and then we liked it, and it was a good price, and we were able to secure the spot, and he was transferred in a couple days. So that was how that worked out really.
Yeah, smoother than you thought, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I feel like things tend to happen for certain reasons at certain times, and either for the better or worse, but the way it's supposed to happen, you know. So, so you found your dad and that was on your trip that you already had decided you're moving back, or that, right? And then,
well, then I'm sorry, I never actually answered your question, but that was at that point I realized, well, you know, when you have them in a care home, you really need to be. You can't be like, you know, was it with 13 hours, 14 hours. 14 hours time difference away and distance-wise, because they need to be able to reach you, and my mom wasn't going to be able to answer a lot of those questions, you know, and so that at that point when on that trip I realized, like, oh, they need somebody here,
right.
So that's kind of what was very clear. So I went back and gave my notice, and then packed up. It took me like 2 or 3 months. It took me like 3 months to, you know, get my things situated and figure out what I'm going to do. And
you landed in Taiwan. So how's it been since you've landed in Taiwan? Because you said you only really came to visit a few times or something, that you never lived here. But how's it been? Or how is it?
Yeah. Well, first I had to figure out. So there's a lot of layers here. So, you know, I had never lived abroad, so I had to figure out, like, okay, what does that mean? Do I apply for a visa? And then I knew nothing about international travel other than tourist type of travel. I mean, just even like temporarily living in another country, and I didn't know what my status was. I'm the only one in my family who was born in the U.S. So I had to first figure out like, what do I need to do in order to get like residency status, or what kind of status in order to be able to advocate for my parents. So that was my first question, and then I realized, oh, the best is to get residency, so that you can get benefits like healthcare benefits, and you can, because I quickly learned from the trip that I made when my dad was in the hospital to get him transferred to a care home, that there's a lot of things, which is a good thing in Taiwan, where there's a lot of protection for the elderly in terms of even their finances. So if you're not, if you're not already like if you're not added to the account simply by being related, you can't.
You can't access any.
You can't access any of their funds. I guess in Taiwan there's a lot of kids who live abroad, and they come home and their parents are no longer able to make decisions, and they want to take their parents' money, something like that. So there's a lot of suspicion, and there's a lot of I find a lot of regulations and a lot of there's a lot of the banks are very strict.
Right.
And which is a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing, unless you have to, you have a legitimate reason and you really need to do it, because you have to go through then the whole huge process, which I can imagine must be complicated.
So I realized like I really need to get residency to do a lot of the advocating for my otherwise I'm like useless. I can't really help them with too much. So then I contacted and that was one of those things like I learned is, because Taiwan isn't a country, it doesn't have an embassy. So I had to figure out, well, where do you do your passport? Like I had to like Google so many things, like what do I do? And the funny thing is, like, I would ask my mom, but she, like I was also realizing like, growing up, we spoke Taiwanese at home.
Taiwanese or Mandarin?
Taiwanese. Yeah, okay. Taiwanese. Okay. But it was really Taiwanese with a lot of English.
Right.
But I never distinguished it. But when it comes to trying to get important things done, besides like, I'm hungry, where's the food? And, basic things, but more important things like practical matters, I lacked the vocabulary to communicate, and she lacked, and also because of her stroke, she wasn't able to articulate things so clearly, and so it was really hard to get answers from my parents, because my parents also they had to reapply for their residency moving back.
Oh, really? They never gave up their Taiwan citizenship. Though,
no, they didn't. But they had to. There's something that they had to go through to apply to get their
benefits and stuff.
Their resident, their resident certificate.
Oh, okay.
Their resident ID.
Yeah.
So they had to reapply for that, and they had to apply for the Taiwan passport. They went through all that when they moved back to Taiwan. So I was trying to get that information from them, but I couldn't really do it in a way that it made sense to me. So I did a lot of Googling, and I don't remember how I think I eventually found in the U.S. it's called the TECO, Taiwan Economic Cultural Affairs, which makes no sense to me, but that's what it's called.
Yeah,
and
I mean that's what I had to go through, really, because when I decided that I was going to move back, and then had to learn all the processes and stuff like that, and I was really lucky that I had. When I was adopted, I had a Taiwan passport, but I didn't remember it then. So I was very, very lucky that I already had an old expired passport that my adopted mom had kept for me, because otherwise it would have been a real big, huge process. So I had to get that passport, and then I had to be in Hawaii and go to the TECO, division or consulate. and then reapply for a passport there.
Right.
And then I had to fly back to Taiwan with that, and then I could apply for a Taiwan ID.
Okay.
So now that was easier because I already had
You were
a passport.
born here, and also
Yes,
you were born
exactly,
in Taiwan.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
then your situation is even totally different because then you must have had to prove your relationship to your parents.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because I'm an adult, so
Yeah.
all the information. So what it took me so long to figure this out because the information that is on the TECO site or in any blog or foreigners, living outside of Taiwan, Taiwanese Americans living outside of Taiwan. All the information is either someone who was born in Taiwan and then grew up in the U.S.
Right.
or was a child still, and their parents, who was a minor, and their parents are trying to get their child Taiwan citizen or Taiwan nationality.
Yes.
There was nothing. It was so hard for me to find any guidance on someone who had Taiwanese parents, nationals, but they themselves were born in the U.S.
Yeah. One of my friends just recently went through that. I forgot.
Yeah.
Until you just mentioned that. Yeah, he had to go through a long process.
And I had, I was doing research in the U.S. and I had people here in Taiwan doing research here in Taiwan, and it wasn't matching. Like, this is what you need to do. And then even when we went to the, what do you call it in Taiwan? The Ministry of
Culture or
no, the Ministry of
Foreign Affairs?
Immigration, the immigration office. Even they didn't give you the right information because I would get two different types of paperwork.
Yep.
So it took that whole process just took me a long time to figure out, like, just to pin down what do I need
Yeah, I
to
know.
apply.
And you have to double check because like you just said,
Yeah.
a certain department knows their stuff, but they don't know all the other things you needed on top of that.
That's
So-
what's frustrating about the Taiwan government offices is that you ask one question, they will give you one answer.
Yeah.
They don't pan out to give you
The initiative
The reason
to-
why you're asking this question, it falls under this bigger umbrella.
Yes.
So here are all the other stacked layers of information that you might need
Yeah.
because you are asking about this specific
Exactly,
So
exactly.
with every stage, you have to come up with a question, you ask them, and then they'll give you the answer. And it's almost like a yes or no answer. Yes, that's right. And if you don't think of the question, they won't, they can't extrapolate, they can't, it's just,
Yeah, it's not the initiative where they need to have the creative thinking of helping. They're very helpful here in Taiwan.
yes, if you ask them the
certain
right
things.
question.
Yeah. So you went through all that process. So do you end up finalizing everything, and you're able? Do you have the ID?
Yeah, fine. And then what I had to do was I had to, so I needed my parents' Taiwan ID and their passport, copies of that. I needed their actual passport. What was going to be the easiest is if I just took their passport with me, but I couldn't apply for anything in Taiwan. I had to do it in the TECO office at the time I was living in Chicago, and apply there in Chicago, and then they had to send it to the TECO in DC because for whatever reason that's the national one, and I had to get a background check by the FBI and the State Department, and then that all had to be verified by the TECO office in DC.
Yeah.
And that took a really long time because that whole piece took me forever to figure out how to get to that point. Because when I asked in Taiwan, they thought I was in the category of I was returning.
Yeah.
So they gave me the wrong information, and then it took me a really long time to figure out, like, I couldn't apply for it in Taiwan. I had to do it in the U.S. And then what I needed to do in the U.S. in terms of, like, getting my yeah, I needed to get two separate things, the FBI background check, and then that had to be approved. And then once that was approved, then I could send it to the State Department. But I could do it through, and that took me forever to figure out, like, who do I send it to? Do I send it to TECO in Washington? Because I couldn't just send it to TECO in Washington because I also needed certain things already done for the TECO in Washington to approve. So that I didn't know who was going to do, like, what came first, the chicken before the egg.
Yeah.
So then I had to hire, what I ended up doing, what was me the easiest, I was going through a third party. I had to pay a third party who would then make sure both were expedited, or whereas the TECO and this other third party were able to track that piece of document. So I did all that work. I wasn't going to lose that document.
Right.
So that was the, yeah, there was just so many things that you had to figure out, for at least with my situation. And then what was the other problem was, because I was born in the US, I needed to get my birth certificate translated into Chinese.
Oh, yeah, everything, yeah.
In order to apply. So I had everything from the US, but then I had certain things I still needed. There was always a little piece.
Yeah.
And you never knew until you ask that question, and then they'll tell you.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was also a long thing, because one person in the government office said you had to go to court to get that done. And then another person said, no, it's okay to go to a special translating place that is that translates it, and then you get it notarized, which is at a bank.
Okay. At a bank, you could go to AIT and get it, which is the American
or some
Institute.
other place.
Yeah. It's really, really complicated. So with this whole process, then it's together. After you finally figured it out, you have your ID now, right?
No, so then after I apply for my ID, I have to wait. I can't leave the country for 1 year.
Okay.
And then after 1 year, I go back. And also Taiwan has this thing of, like, you have your ID based on you have to do, like, a household registration, which is so foreign to me. So I had to, and at that time, because my parents had they were in two properties, and my dad went to the care home, we decided to sell that one property. And so I had to do the stuff of, like, combining the household registration, getting a new household registration for my parents, and then using that, because I needed all my parents' passports and stuff and their household registration to apply for it's called a resident certificate. It's not the resident ID. It's a resident certificate.
Right, because you didn't have an ID at the time, so you had another process.
And then with that resident certificate, if I stay in Taiwan for 1 year, actually even before that, I had to go through a certain thing to get a Taiwan passport first. And then with the Taiwan passport, then I went through the whole thing that I just described to you.
Yeah,
that was another thing. And then with that and my Taiwan, and I had to enter this time when I moved here, I had to enter with my Taiwan passport, not my U.S. passport.
Yes.
Which they used that to apply for the resident permit.
Yeah.
And then with the resident permit, I stay for 1 year without leaving the country. And then that was in June. So then this coming June, like June 2nd, I then go back. Supposedly it should be really easy. As far as I understand right now, it should be really easy. I go to the household registration. I show my parents' household registration and my resident certificate and my passport showing that I haven't left the country.
Yeah.
Then I should be able to get a household registration. And with that, I then go back to the immigration and get my Taiwan ID.
Yes. Yeah. And that makes you official.
That makes me official.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I went through when I was moving back to Taiwan, aside from the process that we talked about, not as complicated as yours, but I also had to kind of think about dual citizenship, because you always hear that the U.S. doesn't allow dual citizenship, but when I researched it further, actually they do allow, if the country that you are going to be getting that citizenship is related to you somehow, like your parents or you were born there or something like that. So, I mean, you've still maintained your U.S. as well as now you have your Taiwan passport. So, yeah. So now that all of that is situated and you're legal in Taiwan, sort of, not until June 2nd, right?
Yeah.
What have you been doing in the meantime? You know, taking care of your parents or whatnot, but have you navigated your time here in Taiwan?
Yeah. So the other kind of strange thing about me is, you know, I grew up speaking Taiwanese, so I don't speak Mandarin, even though my parents tried to put my brother and I through Chinese school. But I think it sort of started late, and we rebelled because I think we were like 9 and 10, and we were with these kindergartners, and we didn't want to be with little kindergartners. So we refused to learn Chinese, but this is just goes to say that I don't know Chinese, and I find it kind of, given all the different transitions, it's hard to like, and also I'm also, because I'm here because of my parents, but when my parents pass away, I think I want to go back to the States. So what is it worth the investment at this stage to learn Chinese? So that kind of was a big question mark in my mind in terms of, now can I get a job without learning Chinese? So, you know, I started with that question, and I've been, you know, little by little figuring out. I've tried different things, you know. I tried when I first got here, because there's nobody who has all the answers for you. Because I don't know. I mean, they have answers, but whether it really applies to you,
exactly,
or is the most helpful is another thing. So, I applied when I first got here. I mean, both my parents were in and out of the hospital, so that took up like 6 to 9 months. And then, and at that time too, when I first moved here, I still was trying to figure out my documents and getting all that. And then I also was thinking about maybe a career transition, because I thought, what sort of industry would make it more feasible for me to get a job. And it seems like lately in the marketplace in Taiwan is mostly in tech, especially multinational companies, because I was thinking of, I'm not going to be able to learn Mandarin Chinese quickly enough to speak and let alone write it, that maybe I need to think about the job market that is the broadest. And it seemed like the tech was kind of booming here, and what would it take for me to get my foot in the door in that area? And so that was another kind of thing that I was researching and seeing what sort of jobs match my experiences. What could I transition to? What do I need to upskill? So I spent a lot of time just trying to figure that out, and then taking some classes, taking some courses, trying to get into networking, because my other situation was I haven't applied actually for a job in almost 15 years.
Right.
So it's been a long time since I've actually
had to apply.
Upgraded, you know, and I hadn't been really networking or doing any of that. So kind of like getting into what is the platform that is used, because back when last time I applied for a job, I actually faxed my resume, and I think nobody does that anymore.
So fast,
You know, so and back then you still made phone calls and spoke to a person. So a lot of things had changed. So just kind of catching up on, okay, what's the current trend of job searching, networking. So that was a whole nother panorama of things. And then there's sort of like, and then Taiwan, okay, if I want to apply for jobs in multinational companies in Taiwan, what's out there? What's the culture? What's, you know, how do people, is it a different platform than the platforms I use in the US or North America to apply for jobs? And is the resume format the same? Or are things really like globalized, or are there things specific to each country in terms of the way they apply for jobs, the way they network?
Yeah.
So I can write a blog about.
Yeah, you should, because you've gone through a lot of this stuff. You could write an informational thing for somebody that wants to come or has to come back to Taiwan. But I mean, there are jobs that are only for English speaking, but of course it's much better, I find, if you are able to speak Mandarin. So because like you said, you didn't have that much time to do it. And you've been taking classes?
I've been doing like online classes and different software platforms. But yeah, and I've done tutorials before I came to Taiwan. I did a one-on-one session, but Chinese is hard to learn when you didn't learn it growing up. I mean, I studied French and Spanish.
Yeah,
which is
I know. Me too.
not very useful.
Yeah. I mean, and plus too, unless you're exposed to it all the time, it's harder to pick up, because I remember I took Mandarin for a couple of years in college when I decided that I should learn some Mandarin. And then the first time that I was exposed to Mandarin really after that was when I went to Beijing for the first time. That was maybe 10 years after I had that. And so, of course, I was in the States and I wasn't around the language, and it was difficult. And then at that time, I had projects. So I would go into a city for 3 or 4 months, do that project, and then move somewhere else with my company. So,
and you were speaking you had to speak Mandarin?
Well,
Mandarin?
it was helpful if I knew Mandarin, but at the time, like I said, it had been so long that my Mandarin was not that good. So I was an assistant manager at the time. But then when I started getting my own projects in China, because I did projects in Xi'an, in Dalian, in Shanghai, and I would have an assistant that would help me. But every time I would, after these few months, I would move back to the States. So it never got to the point where I was really immersed and learning it. And it wasn't really, and even when I moved to Shanghai to work, my clients and my company dealt with a lot of international English speaking people. So I lived there for 7 years, but I never improved my Mandarin that much. And it wasn't until I came to Taiwan here, and not necessarily working in a corporate environment, but dealing with a lot of local life, that my Mandarin is improving more. And I find that it's helpful and really necessary, because even yesterday I'm having my friend Robert here, just a simple thing of downloading a government app about receipts and things like that, or simple things like that most of the websites are in Chinese.
Yes.
And even though I can try to translate it, some of them don't translate, and it's such a process, right? And so, I had to have Robert help me out to get the thing going. Yeah, it makes life a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
So living here with all these things that have happened, have you had any type of culture shock type of thing? I mean, amidst all the things that you've had to deal with, have you even had time to be culture shocked, or actually you did, because a lot of the things are so different, right? I mean,
I don't think there was anything that was shocking. There are a few things that I discovered. So I didn't realize there are a lot of international people here in Taiwan. And there are a lot of, I mean, well, that's how we met through the international group. And I find that so, I mean, I think if I didn't have that, I probably would go crazy. Just because, why is that? And I've been, thinking, why is that? Because I always thought of myself as Taiwanese American, but being in Taiwan, I feel more American.
Yeah.
And I think because I think to some degree, because Taiwan is a small country in terms of size and population, even though that like a third of what were we 23, 24 million live on a third of the island. So it seems much more compacted.
Yeah.
So, and in some ways and I've lived in different cities in the U.S.
So it's not as crowded, or it doesn't seem as crowded as it is here.
Yeah, and it seems really crowded here, but but when you think about it, there isn't that many people. But it's just that they're in a smaller space.
Yeah.
So I think that because of that, their world is very small. You know, like when I was living in Tainan, when I first arrived, it's like the people in Tainan feel like Taipei is another country. When it's like, for me, coming from the Midwest, it's okay, it's like 3 hours by car, which is nothing, you know. But I think, so when you have that kind of mentality, and it's the same with like people who live in Bangchao, who go to Taipei, maybe it's like, oh, it's so far. Like that's the impression that I got, is even initially with the friends that I was making, it's like, going from, I live in Muza, to go from Muza to, what my mom right now is staying in Sanxia. Like that's so far. I'm like, it's half an hour drive.
Yeah. Well, I
5
think
minutes, and it's in kilometers, so it's even closer than if it were in miles.
I think though, when we talk about driving, I mean, a lot of people that live here don't have cars, so they really have to rely on public transportation. And knowing myself, I do have access from my family, my sisters, to have a car, but I never bother them to borrow it, although it would be so much more convenient. But the public transportation takes a lot more time traveling.
And I understand that, but I was also trying to imagine, okay, well, like the people in New York City, there's a lot of people
Subways
in New York
too,
City,
right?
and your subway, you go anywhere.
True.
But the people who live there don't think that Boston is so far. Or like California is so far. When California is
far.
It's really far.
5 hours.
But it's just the mentality, I think. And I think that was my initial exposure to Taiwan, when I realized, when people are like, oh, Taipei is so far, and but it's that way in many things too, and I think just probably because people don't travel abroad as much, even though now I think the younger generation is doing that more. A lot of people go abroad to study, and
I think it depends on where you're at, because Taipei has a lot more people that travel quite a bit compared to Tainan, which is
more provincial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think for you there, it was probably just missing the connection of English language for one thing, and people that have been more international have been traveling abroad that can connect, that you can relate to, right?
Yes, and then the other thing, the other thing I wanted to share is that because I know Taiwanese, initially when I was in Tainan, I would try to speak some Taiwanese, but then people would get very upset when I didn't know Mandarin.
Oh.
And it was almost like they wouldn't believe me.
Oh, you know, because you could speak Taiwanese, but you can't speak Mandarin. How is that possible?
So they wouldn't believe me, and so then somehow it just didn't go well when I started to speak Taiwanese. So what I've learned is to speak English.
Exactly.
People are much nicer to you when you just try to speak English.
Exactly. You know, I mean, that's been my experience too. And I feel like sometimes, even though this is a kind of a bad thing, if you speak English, you can get away with more things, or you can act like, oh, well, I didn't know that, or something like that. And it's true, people are much nicer. Although when I do speak Mandarin, and I've been trying really hard to make it more, I see my English has gotten really bad since I live here now. I can't think of words so easily. I can't, more in Chinese, I'm thinking more Belgian or more standard,
Yeah.
standard Mandarin and stuff. But people can always still tell that I'm not, you know, not a local. And they always mention that, oh, where you come from? But although people think that I'm from Hong Kong or some other place and stuff, but they're, yeah, much, much nicer for some reason. Okay. So were your Taiwanese though? I mean, you said your parents used to teach you with kind of mixed English and Taiwanese. So even your Taiwanese is not fluent. It would be kind of broken.
Yeah, I find it more basic.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to think I was fluent, but then when I really tried to just speak in Taiwanese to, yeah, communicate things, I found I lacked a lot of the vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not doing any business. I'm just with family.
Right. So it's
the language,
colloquial.
yeah, the vocabulary you use is more simple. And
right now, you're in Taiwan, and you identify as American, you said, for certain cases. Is that right? So maybe it's whichever fits us better, that you would identify as Taiwanese or
no, I mean, I really didn't grow up with too much of the Taiwanese culture other than Taiwanese.
Yeah.
And then maybe the food.
Yeah.
But coming here, I realized, for example, there's temples everywhere. And I would ask, when I first came to Taiwan, I would see, around every corner, you see these temples which I never saw, I've never grown up with. They don't have those types of temples in the US. So when I would ask my mom or my dad, and they would have these, I guess in terms of culture shock, what was also really striking to me was just the calendar, like the lunar calendar. And how the dates are different. Like the year is not, it's not 2024, it's 113, which took me the
113 now?
Is it 113 or 112?
I know
it's 112.
Yeah.
And the monetary, like the numbering, the counting.
Yeah, so they add
they have like 10,000 is an actual
that
decimal
throws me
point.
off totally.
And then the other thing is that the whole the holidays I'm used to, because in the U.S., even if you're not Christian, you have Christian holidays. So Christmas, Easter, and it's like it's a national holiday. Christmas Day, everyone has Christmas Day off. But here, it's a normal working day, and then you have like tomb sweeping off, which I've never heard of tomb sweeping before.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about. I even though my parents are Taiwanese, I didn't grow up with any of that. All those holiday, those festival days, and it's very much part of like their family days too for people.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up with any of that.
Yeah.
So to me, if you would ask me that, it's not shocking, but it is striking. For me, I think that is. And then when I would ask people, so what's tomb sweeping? You go to do what?
Yeah.
And it's even the English speaking people don't really know how to they don't know how to provide the contextual background.
Yeah.
Or with this, like this past weekend was a big festival or feast day of, was it Matsu or some goddess? And I remember going to a temple and people were dressed up in costumes, and I would ask, like, what are you celebrating? What is it for? And people were like, well, we don't know. We've always just done this.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how can that be? You don't have any contextual background or
sometimes I feel sometimes I feel like it's easier for people that don't speak English so much to just say, I don't know, rather than trying the complicated process to try to explain. And plus, if somebody's grown up with it and they just take things for granted, like we do a lot of things in the States that way. Yeah. But I know definitely a lot of people that just, it's too hard to explain. Never mind. I don't know why. But yeah, things like this is different.
Culture, if it's part of you grew up with it and your grandparents lived it, I would think you would know how to explain the value of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Yeah, maybe if you in the U.S. if you ask somebody, well, what's the significance of the Easter Bunny? Maybe somebody wouldn't know.
Or, even for Christmas, a lot of
Or
people think
what's
Christmas, Santa Claus, but they don't necessarily know that it came from St. Nicholas and from Europe and
Yeah.
the origins of exactly why.
Exactly.
So it's the same type of thing, I feel like.
I think dealing with people who were convinced that I spoke Mandarin.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't, and I can speak a few words in Chinese and maybe my accent is pretty good. And so I would say yes or no. I mean, I would say some things, but when it was clear that I wasn't understanding them, people just yelled at you.
Oh.
Or they
Wow.
got upset.
Was this in Tainan? Maybe it's
Tainan,
not
yeah.
so, they're much more direct or.
Yeah. Well, no, I had somebody yell at me here too.
Really?
I was riding a bike and I was going to the ATM and I wanted to just park my bike. The sidewalk was completely empty. I was just going to park my bike in front of the door to the bank to go in to go to the ATM. Well, the security guard, who was not the security guard of the bank, but security guard of this condominium, started yelling at me. Not yelling at me, but like saying, you can't, something that had to do with my bike. And so I moved my bike. I thought maybe because my bike shouldn't be by the door. So I moved it closer to the street or the sidewalk. And then he continued to yell at me. I had no idea what the problem was. He wanted me to put my bike on the street.
Okay.
So on the street where the cars were passing. And there was he wanted me to put it on the street and not on the sidewalk. But it wasn't even on the sidewalk in front of the apartment or condominium that he was the security guard of. He just said the whole thing had to be clear, which I don't understand.
Yeah, I think this situation, because we have Asian faces and there's expectations because of our Asian face to behave a certain way. And then the treatment of local people compared to maybe foreigners is definitely different. So a lot of times when that stuff happens to me or I don't understand what they're trying to say to me, I once again break out in English, because then that makes them step back and it's like, oh, maybe she has a legitimate reason why she parked there and she,
so that's why I learned, that was the biggest lesson. I just don't even, I just speaking in English.
Okay.
And it's just much better. And then people immediately their expression, their conduct changes like 360.
Which really makes you think, about how they treat local people when certain things happen. Maybe local people wouldn't necessarily do what we did or make a mistake on.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was in Shanghai, it was the same thing, except they're much ruder there than they are in Taiwan. And as soon as you spoke English, and I, try not to confront, but that was the way to take care of solve the situation, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and
the more you even just your body language expresses any confrontation, they get really upset.
Well, I don't know. I've seen people yelling and screaming at each other on the street, in Taiwan or in other places in China and things like that, where you think that the culture is much more, more quiet and but I think a big part of it is too something to do with face. If you make them lose face, using anger to express, I don't know. It's complicated and it is the way it is here. So
I had read in a foreigner's blog in Taiwan that, and I don't know if this is true because I can't read the laws in Chinese, that public displays, like verbal, verbal confrontation or like yelling in public. Is like you can get a ticket for that? Is that?
I think if you call somebody certain names or something like that, you could get fined. If I believe so. So I don't know. It's just an interesting dynamic that we have to work around.
Yeah.
But so have you had any success then finding your place here in terms of job or any potential things?
I'm still looking. I've stopped using the job search platforms that are local here. I just got tired of, because people don't even, I don't even think the whole thing of networking through, like, it's easier for me to network on LinkedIn than it is through 104, 101, whatever, Kick Resume. I find, I don't know, I just don't find it as user friendly. And well, with 101 and the other ones, I have to translate anyway. So
yeah, I think because 104 or 101, they're not, maybe the people that are on there are not already people that have a lot of work job, you know, experience in terms of corporate jobs and that kind of stuff. Whereas LinkedIn, you have majority of everybody there is. So yeah, that might be it. So
and yeah, and then I have been able to network with some Taiwanese nationals who either studied abroad and have come back to work in Taiwan, and the majority, and then with some people who've, like, Chamber of Commerce, some people who are in the British Chamber of Commerce or Canadian and American, and the overall sort of consensus I've been getting is it's very hard for foreigners to get a job in Taiwan if you don't speak Mandarin. So now I'm kind of, I took some courses, and then now I'm trying to see about remote work with multinationals, companies outside of Taiwan. Unless you're like like a software developer or like electrical engineer,
teacher,
or a teacher. I feel like those are the specialties that are more needed, or they may be willing to hire foreigners. But you know, what I'm looking for, it doesn't seem very popular or very needed.
Right.
So,
well,
or I've been told start a business. That's the best thing for a foreigner to do, because start a business. But I don't think I.
Yeah, like what would you do? That's like another layer of things that you'd have to learn and go through. Well, you know, I mean, really good luck to you for finding a job and whatever, you know, decisions that you make, because these are the things. And you mentioned that it might not be for future plans to stay here long term. So making those decisions are not hard, especially when you kind of still need to make a living, right? Yeah.
I mean, I have contemplated starting a business. I mean, maybe explore that, but.
Well, if a lot of people have told you, and you're hearing from all different sides more than once, that you should do it, or even yourself, then you should listen.
Yeah. So we'll see.
We'll see, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for coming by and sharing your story with us.
Thanks for chatting.
Yeah. And thank you, folks, for stopping by. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.